Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning here on our latest webinar. My name is Loic, Dimithe. I'm an associate here in the Miller Johnson Corporate Group. I'm joined along with some of my colleagues also in the corporate group, Erik, Daly, and Chelsea Austin. I'm here this morning to give you another update on the Main Street Lending Program. Consistent with how we've typically been running these webinars, we want to go ahead and start with a few updates, really, consistent with the spirit of ethics and collaboration in our efforts to continue to provide information and work with both our clients and the various community members. We do want to provide you just some additional pieces of information before we get into the main substance of today's webinar. Starting with just the worldwide COVID count, currently sits at 7 million confirmed cases and 404 confirmed deaths. In the U.S., we've got 2.4 million confirmed cases and 114,000 confirmed deaths. In Michigan, we've got 64,998 confirmed cases and 5,943 deaths. And then finally, here in Kent County, we've got 3,954 confirmed cases and 103 deaths. So, there's a mix of positive and not so positive news. Here in Michigan, some positive news for the third day in a row. Our new case count has remained below 200, which is a very positive trend for Michigan. Generally, throughout the rest of the nation, we've got about 19 states that have trends of new cases still rising as states throughout the country slowly reopen at different rates. 22 states are trending downwards, and 9 states are more or less holding steady. In particular, in Arizona, a rise in cases has resulted in hospitals activating emergency plans due to the increased need for intensive care units and intensive care beds. And also in Texas, we've seen, for the third consecutive day, a record number of coronavirus hospitalizations. So although things are getting a little bit better here in Michigan, that's not necessarily the case in states throughout the rest of the nation. In terms of just the general economic outlook, the Fed Reserve put forth their first economic projection for this year and indicated that they expect really the unemployment rate to end for the year 2020 at around 9.3% and remain around that figure, or remain at an elevated figure for a few years, coming into really around 5.5% in the year 2022. In terms of combating the existing economic crisis, the Treasury Secretary and the Trump administration they're continuing to look at further stimulus packages. But as things stand, the Senate will likely not pass the House-passed HEROES Act in its current form. So it remains to be seen what further legislation will come our way in the coming days. So that's it by way of just some general updates. Now jumping really into the substance of today. In our efforts to continue to provide information on the Main Street Lending Program, we wanted to give you just a set of recent updates to the program, consistent with how we've always done our presentations. We want to, again, provide this information, but encourage people to reach out if they have any questions about anything that they see. Just by way of background, I'm sure you're all familiar with the program to some degree or another, but originally the CARES Act authorized and encouraged really the establishment of the Main Street Lending Program. On April 9th, it was really the first announcement of the program and the announcement that the Federal Reserve will purchase up to $600 billion in loan participations through the establishment of really special purpose vehicles. The program created 3 main facilities: the Main Street New Loan Facility, the Priority Loan Facility, and the Expanded Loan Facility, which are designed to service either existing or new loans with just fairly similar terms, but some degree of variance depending on the type of program and what the program is really geared on who the program is geared on servicing. Because it is a Federal Reserve program, one thing that should be noted and that should be kept in mind is that it's not really a program designed for really at-risk borrowers, and the program has a variety of provisions and mechanisms designed to ensure that the borrower really is an institution or an entity that was in good standing prior to COVID-19, and that's a fairly credit-worthy borrower. Next slide, please. Most recent updates came very recently on June 8th, in which the Federal Reserve issued just some revised term sheets on the programs in an effort to really make them more available to small and medium-sized businesses to receive support. And the Federal Reserve also issued some updated FAQs, in part reflecting the changes to the term sheets, and also in part to just continue to provide further information about the program. Next slide, please. So with that, I turn it over to my colleague Chelsea Austin to get into some of the specific changes found in the term sheets and found in the various facilities. Thank you.
Thanks, Loic, and good morning, everyone. So I'll just cover some of the high-level changes from the programs thus far. So for the term, each MSLP now has a term or maturity of 5 years, and this is previously 4 deferments under each MSLP. The principal payments are now deferred for 2 years as opposed to the previous 1, and the interest payments continue to be deferred for 1 year for all the MSLPs. The interest rate, the interest payments will be capitalized pursuant to each eligible lender's customary practices. So that's important to keep in mind. The interest rate, again, applying to all MSLP loans, is a LIBOR plus 3% rate. Next slide, please. So the minimum loan size for the MSNLF and the MSPLF loans, they now have a minimum size of $250,000 as opposed to the previous $500,000, and the MSELF loans retains a minimum size of $10 million. For the maximum loan size, the MSNLF, it's the lesser of $35 million, previously $25 million, and again, or an amount that, when added to the eligible borrower's outstanding and undrawn available debt, does not exceed 4 times the adjusted EBITDA. For the MSPLF, it's the lesser of $50 million as opposed to $25 million, and again, when added to the eligible, or an amount that, when added to the eligible borrower's total debt, does not exceed 6 times the adjusted EBITDA. And for the MSELF, it's the lesser of $300 million as opposed to $200 million, or an amount that, when added to the eligible borrower's total debt, does not exceed 6 times adjusted EBITDA. Something specific to MSELF, the loan cap size of 35% of certain of the eligible borrowers' existing outstanding and undrawn available debt has now been eliminated. Next slide, please. Just some more things about the loan size. The revised FAQs explain that borrowers are expected to submit statements evidencing their EBITDA calculations. These would include their financial statements, their U.S. GAAP compliant financial records, and this is to the extent that the borrower is required to prepare or ordinarily prepares these kinds of financial statements or records. Next slide, please. All right, so turning our attention to risk retention for eligible lenders. Eligible lenders' risk retention for the MSNLF and MSELF remains unchanged at 5%, while the MSPLF declines to 5%, previously at 15%. And again, specific to MSLP, SPV will purchase 95% participations in all loans. And then the amortization schedules for the MSNLF For years 3 through 5, it will be 15%, 15%, and 70% respectively. And this was previously 33.33% repayment, which was due in years 2 through 4. And for both MSPLF and MSELF, the years for years 3 through 5, again, it's 15%, 15%, and 70% respectively. And this was previously 15%, 15%, 70%, but the repayment was due in years 2, 3, and 4. Next slide, please. All right, that was the expansion of the program, and I will turn over to my colleague Erik Daly to talk about the updated MSLPs FAQs.
Hi, thank you, Chelsea. So as Loic and Chelsea alluded to, along with the updated term sheets that expanded eligibility or loan capacity for small and medium-sized businesses, there were also some updated frequently asked questions, some of which relate to issues we've covered already, and others of which relate to just other program terms. On the multi-lender MSELF loans, there was some additional guidance provided about how lenders in a multi-lender group could participate in an upsizing. And the upshot is that the rules retain the requirement that you have to have been part of the multi-lender group to be an eligible lender to upsize a loan, but more than one eligible lender under an existing multi-lender facility can now originate an upsized MSELF loan. So you could have, if you have a syndicated loan, multiple lenders who are eligible to participate in the Main Street lending program, you could have 2, 3, 4 of them each originate an MSELF loan, but all of the loans would need to, in the aggregate, still be lower than the cap, 300 million, as Chelsea mentioned, or the EBITDA multiple based cap, whichever is lower. So you could work with multiple of your lenders in a multi-lender facility, but it would require some significant coordination among the borrower and the lender group just to make sure you don't trip over the loan cap, and the documents generally remain consistent. So the degree of difficulty on that will be a little bit higher, but it is allowed. And then the FAQs also clarified that any eligible lender who does originate an upsized loan under the MSELF may not share their 5% retention with any other members of that multi-lender facility. So each portion or tranche that is originated for an MSELF has to be retained by that eligible lender until the maturity or it's moved off the books of the Main Street Lending Program SPV. Next slide, please. There was also an update relating to affiliation concepts and rules under the, this really relates to each of the Main Street Lending Program facilities. So if you have a group of businesses which are affiliated with one another, for example, private equity fund portfolio companies, or if you have a family office that has multiple businesses, or just common ownership, so you have an individual or a group of people who own multiple businesses that are affiliates of one another. The general concept is that you need to kind of aggregate the EBITDA and debt levels for purposes of calculating loan availability and maximum loan size and the like under the Main Street lending programs. But the updated FAQs did clarify or state that if only one business in an affiliated group is seeking a loan under the Main Street lending program, then that business does not need to consolidate the EBITDA or debt of its other affiliated businesses unless those affiliates are subsidiaries of that one business that's seeking a loan, and those subsidiaries are consolidated into its financial statements. So, one example that I just alluded to would be if you had a private equity fund that had multiple portfolio companies and only one of those companies was seeking to participate in the Main Street lending program, then it would not need to consolidate the EBITDA or debt of other affiliated portfolio companies for purposes of determining the amount of the loan it's eligible for and the like. But if any other portfolio company or affiliated business did subsequently apply, they would then need to aggregate. It's unclear what would happen at that point with the original loan for the business that first applied, but it is clear that subsequent affiliates or would-be borrowers into the Main Street lending program would need to then consolidate EBITDA and debt for their calculations. Next slide, please. There was also some additional guidance provided about how different SBA loans that have been tapped by many small businesses relate to the Main Street lending program. And there was, I believe, a question submitted in advance of the webinar about this. And the main takeaway is that even if your business or a business has received a Paycheck Protection Program loan or an EIDL, an economic injury disaster loan from the Small Business Administration or an authorized SBA lender, those businesses would still be eligible for Main Street lending program loans. That's clear. The updated FAQs do clarify that unless and until your PPP loan is forgiven, however, which could take some time, just given the mechanics and timeframes for forgiveness under the PPP, that those PPP loans would count as outstanding debt for the borrower under the Main Street lending program calculations that Chelsea went through before. So they would count as part of the total outstanding debt when you're running through your calculations for eligibility and eligible loan amounts. That concept was specifically addressed for Paycheck Protection Program loans, that the outstanding amount would count toward total debt, and the FAQs didn't state this explicitly, but if we're inferring from that if the PPP loans count toward total debt, then certainly the EIDLs would as well, since they're not forgivable at all. So that's not specifically addressed by the updated FAQs, but I think borrowers should proceed under the assumption that any kind of SBA-related loans do count toward total debt unless it's a PPP loan that is actually already forgiven. Next slide, please. And I won't go through this in a huge amount of detail because this will be something that if you participate in the Main Street lending program, you'll work through with your lender or lenders. But the Fed did provide guidance about, and Chelsea alluded to this in the context of EBITDA calculations, but the Fed did provide guidance about how to prepare and present your financial information for purposes of loan origination and validating, how much Main Street lending program financing your business would be eligible for. And basically the concept is that if you already prepare your financial statements or you're required to prepare your financial statements in accordance with U.S. GAAP, then you have to submit U.S. GAAP financial statements and records to validate your calculations and loan eligibility. Same thing with the audit concept, or, if you've typically prepared and have your financial statements audited, then that's what you'll be required to submit. You'll need to use your most recent audited financial statements. I believe if you don't have audited financial statements, then you would, if you have reviewed financial statements, you would use those. Or if you don't have that, I think you might, I believe the requirement would be to use kind of the financials that you would present to the IRS when you're calculating your income taxes. And then this is implied throughout what we've already talked about, but if you typically consolidate subsidiaries in your financial statements, and that's how you present your financial information on a consolidated basis, then that's what you would need to submit to your lender to validate your eligibility and loan availability. So there's a lot more detail there, again, that I'm not getting into that you would need to work through with your lender, but a big picture, the idea is, whatever you're doing now is generally going to be what you're required to present to your lender. Next slide, please. Okay, and then in terms of timing of loan funding and availability, the Fed is really encouraging lenders to start funding these Main Street Lending Program loans that satisfy program participation criteria even before the SPV begins purchasing their 95% loan participations. They clearly want to get there's been a lot of public and political pressure on the Fed and Treasury to use the CARES Act funding that is supporting these loans to get that out in the hands of small and medium-sized businesses. And so they're really encouraging lenders to start doing that and then committing to purchasing the qualifying Main Street Lending Program participations from lenders once the SPV is kind of up and running and purchasing participations. So lenders, once they're registered, may or may not start funding before that time. They may be more conservative and say, oh, even though the Fed is signaling we should do that and they will purchase those participations, we want to be more cautious to make sure that, that it's actually up and running and we have some more certainty that the participations will actually be purchased. So we'll see how that goes. If it takes a long time for the SPV to get up and running, I think we'll probably start to see some lenders originate loans. But if it's going to be a shorter term, I think we probably will still see lenders wait another week or so at least before they start funding too many Main Street Lending Program loans. Next slide, please. There were some updates as well related to what fees lenders could charge borrowers. Basically, the Main Street Lending Program put some hard caps on the types of fees that can be charged. And we've covered that in our prior webinars on the Main Street Lending Program. The main update here, the only change or expansion of what fees lenders can charge borrowers is that the updated FAQs now permit the expanded loan facility lenders or upsizing lenders, if you will, to charge, they're saying, customary consent fees as necessary to amend the existing facility documentation in order to accommodate the upsizing under the MSELF program. So that may be an additional fee that gets charged to a borrower that's doing an upsizing loan. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, the Fed is in the process of updating its various legal documents and certifications. The program is actually being administered by the Boston branch of the Federal Reserve. And so it's hosting the kind of main landing web page for all these form agreements. and they're working to update those. So there are a couple that are, I believe, still kind of in final form. Mainly the lender registration forms, I believe, can still be used for eligible lenders, but most of the borrower forms, when I last checked, were still being updated. And then separate from that topic, the Fed also announced that it is looking to roll out and signaled pretty strongly that there will be a Main Street type lending program for nonprofits. Nonprofits aren't eligible for loans under the existing Main Street lending programs, both by the explicit program terms and also because loan availability is measured by EBITDA, which doesn't really apply readily in the context of not-for-profits. So we'll probably see something in the relatively near term for not-for-profits. Next slide, please. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Loic to kind of wrap things up, and we can address any Q&A as well.
Thank you, Erik, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us this morning. If there are any questions or comments, concerns, we absolutely encourage everyone to reach out and to further discuss. We did want to just conclude, if you could turn to the next slide, please.
Loic, real quick, it looks like there was a Q&A submitted.
Sure.
Yeah, in the text box. Sorry to interrupt. Asking about, the question was asking about whether EBITDA is based on 2019 or some period in 2020. And I think in general it's going to be 2019 EBITDA, but it kind of going back to the financial statement and information requirements, it may depend on what, like, for example, if you haven't done your audit yet for 2019, and you normally would have audited financial statements to use to calculate something like an EBITDA figure, it'll depend on your most recent available financial statements. So it's not going to be a period in 2020. Other than that, it doesn't look like there are questions in the dialogue box. So sorry to interrupt, Loic. I just wanted to handle that one quickly before we wrapped up.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for catching that, Erik. We just wanted to give a quick word on our PPP Compliance Preparedness Program and our Back to Work Resource Center. The Preparedness Program is a program that we have to assist PPP borrowers in preparing for and responding to an audit. Further details are outlined there, and we're happy to further discuss for those that are interested. The Back to Work Resource Center is just a resource that we provide to assist clients and those that subscribe on integrating their workforce back into their operations and making sure that they're doing so in compliance with continuing evolution and regulations and executive orders and the like. So if you have any questions on any of those resources, feel free to reach out to any one of us or anyone else here at Miller Johnson. Chelsea or Erik, do you guys have anything else to add before we conclude?
I don't. This is Erik. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating in our webinars, and hope you have a good day. So nothing else beyond that on my end, Loic. Thank you.
Yep, and I'd like to echo that. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you guys all have a great day.